Mother Mary Elizabeth Lange, Servant of God. Black History 2021. Elizabeth Clarice Lange was born in Haiti around 1784. As a child, her country was in a revolution, and so her parents became refugees in Cuba. In the early 1800s, young Elizabeth left Santiago, Cuba, to seek peace and security in the United States. She moved to Baltimore, Maryland, during a time when slavery was still being practiced in the United States. She settled in an area where a great influx of French-speaking Catholic Haitian refugees had settled. Elizabeth Lange arrived in Baltimore as a courageous, loving, deeply spiritual woman. She was well educated and of independent means, possessing monies left to her by her father. It didn't take Elizabeth long to recognize that the children of her fellow refugees needed education. During a time when there were no public schools, she used her own money and her home to educate these children of color. For 10 years, Elizabeth, with her friend Marie Madeleine Bayless, offered free education. Early in 1828, Reverend James Hector Joubert presented Elizabeth Lange with the challenge to start a school for girls of color. While Elizabeth talked to Father Joubert, she confessed that for over 10 years she'd wanted to commit her life to God and was waiting for God's call. She asked Father Joubert if they could start a woman religious order in addition to the school. St. Francis School for Colored Girls was the first black Catholic school of the country. To begin the new order, Father Joubert provided direction, solicited financial assistance, and encouraged other women of color to become members of this, the first congregation of women of African heritage. Elizabeth was filled with joy. On July 2nd, 1829, Elizabeth and 3 other women pronounced promise of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Elizabeth, founder and first superior of the Oblate Sisters of Providence, henceforth was known as Sister Mary. The Oblate Sisters was the first religious order to be created by and sustained by women of color. She served the Oblates in many ways. She was Superior General from 1829 to 1832, and again from 1835 to 1841. She helped nurse the sick during the cholera epidemic in the early 1830s, and in the mid-1840s worked as a domestic at St. Mary's Seminary. And from 1850 to 1860, she was the novice mistress for the fledgling Oblate Order. The order struggled financially, and so the sisters proudly begged in the streets and made and sold altar cloths to keep afloat. Mother Mary Lange died on February 3, 1882, and was buried in the Cathedral Cemetery. On May 28, 2013, Mother Mary Lange was exhumed and transferred to the home of the Oblate Sisters of Providence, where she was laid to rest in their chapel. Of Mother Mary Lange, we know of her private school in the early 1800s, of her academy in 1828, and of her religious foundation in 1829. There was also an orphanage, a widow's home, spiritual direction, religious education classes, and vocational training. The early sisters did home visiting and conducted night school so black adults could learn to read and write. When the Civil War was over, Baltimore was flooded with black war orphans. Mother Mary gathered 60 of them and began a new order of caring for destitute children. She was a religious pioneer. And so, it's no surprise that in 1991, William Cardinal Keeler, who at the time was Archbishop of Baltimore, and with the approval of Rome, officially opened formal investigation into her life of union with God and works of charity, which would lead to her canonization as saint of the Catholic Church. Mother Mary Elizabeth Lange, servant of God.